If you've been following me for a while, then you will have most definitely seen my vintage 1940s inspired Grandmacore kitchen many, many times. This very room was actually the birth of my channel's entire name, because back when I used to post videos about it on platforms like TikTok, people were genuinely convinced that I lived in a doll's house, and it took some heavy convincing that I didn't. Hence, I changed my channel's name to Real Vintage Doll's House. Do you get it? And this was also the room that started mine and my mum's journey into turning our entire house into a vintage 1940s-esque little paradise. But it didn't always look like this, and the process of turning it into what it is today took well over a year. Like every story, we need to start at the very beginning, and this is what my kitchen looked like when we first came for a viewing. A very run-down, dated in all the wrong ways, and awkward space due to its current layout. Yes, this kitchen was definitely not what drew us to purchasing this house. It was actually the way that the house looked, its age, its location being kind of close to my grandparents and my place of work, and the fact that it retained some of its original features like its outhouse or the cast iron fireplace in one of the bedrooms. Plus, we knew the owner, our sweet Rosa that we'd known from church, and so after a lot of looking around, it finally felt like the stars were beginning to align. But if you'd like to learn the full story as to how we came across and purchased this house, then you can watch this video. The kitchen, however, was not it, but we didn't have a choice but to put up and shut up, because we simply didn't have the funds or the time to turn this space into something truly special, and so we worked with what we had. And when they say that it takes a village, it really, really does, because my family rallied around me and my mum to help us with this move. They grabbed the paintbrushes, and my nan even fashioned a little tea station in the corner of the living room so we could go and have a little break. If it hadn't been for their help, we probably wouldn't have had a livable space for a very long time after moving in. We addressed the things that we could at the time. Simple things like painting the walls a fresher colour, adding appliances that felt a little bit more quaint, changing the handles on our cupboard doors, and my nan had also given us her second-hand Smeg fridge, which started to brighten the space. But as you can see, it just wasn't reaching its full potential, but our options felt kind of restricted. You may or may not know that my home's layout is strange, okay? We only have one door into the property and one door out, which is of course the front door, and our bathroom is right off the kitchen. Now, what we could have done if we'd have saved up a heap of cash, and what many people would have chosen, is to compromise one of the bedroom sizes and install a bathroom upstairs, knock the old bathroom through to extend the kitchen and add a back door. But we didn't have the funds to do this big kind of structural work, and we kind of enjoyed the quirkiness of the layout. Plus, we did not want to tear this very old 1920s property to bits. And so we called upon my incredible carpenter friend to see if he could help us design something new in the space that we already had. And luckily, he was filled with ideas and an expert in woodwork, and so we picked a theme, which at first was simply vintage, and we picked a colour scheme. We wanted to go with a lighter, fresh colour because the space is already quite nooky, and so we kept the walls white, which was purely for ease at the time, and we decided to go with a kind of sage green, willow green sort of accents. But I still felt that there was more to explore in making this space feel more timeless. We wanted a kind of nostalgic serenity, a grandma's kitchen country feel with heavy inspiration from our favourite period of decor, the 1940s. And so Jordan came up with an idea, and I also came up with one. Now, his was to fashion makeshift beams out of real wood, which would help give the space a bit more of a dynamic look, but it was also a great place to hide the wiring from our elemental light bulbs. And my idea, inspired by photographs of a typical 1940s kitchen, was to add black and white tiled flooring, much to Jordan's dismay because he had never tiled anywhere in his life, particularly not an entire kitchen, but he took it on like a trooper. But I also tried my hand at a very small amount of tiling around the countertops using some vintage tiles that we'd salvaged from a jumble sale, £1 for the entire box. Okay, they're not perfect and they're a little bit wonky, but I do still think that they look pretty authentic. When he was building the units, rather than just keeping them flat, he added some really nice detailing around the edge to give the impression of them being a bit more ornate. We also decided early on that we wanted a Belfast sink, so when Jordan was building the sink unit, he had this in mind because Belfast sinks are larger and deeper than normal sinks, and he also built us a kind of pantry space in this very awkward corner of the kitchen, and he used dark wooden shelves, and we had an open design which displayed all of our baking utensils and tinned goods, which is not only nice for access because you can literally just grab what you want when you see it, but I also think that if this sort of small space had been filled with closed cupboards, it would have closed the space in a lot and made it feel a little bit claustrophobic. But by having open shelving, you can see all the way up to the window and you can display a lot of cute vintage things. But oh no, what's that? A white appliance? Not on my watch. And so we added a small curtain to discreetly hide the washing machine, which I happen to feel made a whole world of difference and gave this little part of the kitchen a kind of greengrocer feel. I don't know, when we used to have dogs, two small dogs, Scrappy and Suki were their names, Jordan had also fashioned a tiny little swing door so that we could keep the dogs in that area of the kitchen at night time when they were in bed asleep. And so the whole area really did look like a shop, like you could lean over the old swing door and ask what somebody wanted and go and grab it. And I still think it's kind of retained that traditional shopkeeper kind of feel. I don't know, maybe it's just me. We also must be crazy because we decided to get all of the architraves back to wood to really make the door frames pop. And I have never understood more deeply and within my soul the phrase labour of love. Sorry about that. Labour of love. Because yes, it took absolutely ages. And then once we had new door frames, we replaced the door leading to the stairs, which is one of our favourite features in this house. The fact that the stairs kind of curve right into the kitchen. I just think it's really quirky and unique. We've always loved that. So we could have left that just open, but we have pets. You know, at the moment we have our lovely cat Betty, and when we first moved in we had our dog, so we really needed a door to be able to keep our pets in certain areas of the house if we needed to. So we did add a door, but we added one again that was more in keeping with the entire feel that we were going for. Then we added this lovely vintage inspired, it's not true vintage, Welsh dresser in that same sage green colour, and then littered it with lots of lovely vintage inspired ornaments. But it still felt like something was missing. How could we have all of this lovely vintage charm with a basic white electric cooker smack bang in the middle of it all? And so the hunt began for a cooker that would supply us with what we needed without being too large to dominate this space, because as you can see, the slot where it would live was not huge. And there were some modern options that looked okay, but then we found Glenda. And Glenda, she really changed the game. A genuine late 1940s cooker that was sat in a lady's garage in Liverpool, having belonged to her father. And for £16, she could be ours. God love you, eBay. Now, at the time of purchase, we didn't know, nor did the lady who was making the sale, if this little cooker would actually work. But for £16, I mean, what is the harm in finding out? Oh yes, a 2-hour drive to go and get this incredibly heavy cast iron, quite frankly, filthy piece of history, and employing a gas engineer to inspect her. But would you believe all she needed was a new gas pipe fitting, and £130 later, she was good to go. But she was filthy and rather run down, so me and my mum spent a lot of time cleaning her up, and after looking at reference photos of the same make and model of cooker that is currently in a museum in Rainhill, Liverpool, I could see that the numbers on her dial, although the imprint was still there, that brilliant off-whiteness had worn away with time. And so I meticulously repainted them and then used enamel paint to touch up various bits and bobs until she was back to looking her very best self. And finally ready to be put to work, we naturally did away with any plug-in kettles because we'd no longer need them. Now we had this adorable little cooker that lit with a match. And so we purchased a stovetop kettle for all of our tea brewing needs. And voila, we had a kitchen that not only felt like home, but was a place where we could slow down and enjoy those bygone charms of striking a match and waiting to hear the whistling of that kettle. As I shared Glenda's story, people were absolutely enamoured by her, and one of my TikTok followers actually sent me a cookbook that she had in her collection, which was meant for the cooker model just before Glenda. And then lo and behold, my mum wanders into a charity shop and finds the same brand of cookery book, but a slightly newer edition that is meant for Glenda. 2 vintage cookbooks, both designed with my model of cooker in mind. Over time, we started adding more vintage items and cooking utensils, this 1950s tin opener, lots and lots of teapots, and even my nan's carpet that had been living in her conservatory for many, many years. And finally, I transformed our front door from a basic UPVC door to a 1940s inspired door, of course. The black and white tiles also spilled out into our very small entranceway, which we decided to spruce up by adding some vintage wallpaper, showing off the original cast iron hooks, and adding some adorable pheasant wall hangings, which actually match the wallpaper quite well. It took over 3 months for the kitchen structure to be fully finished because obviously it was Jordan's first time at doing anything like this, and he also had a normal full-time job. And then it was a year or so later after that that we found Glenda, and then another year later before we redesigned the hallway, and then only last year did I redesign the front door. In truth, it has been a long process with several ups and downs and times where it felt like things were just never going to come to fruition. But now this space is one of our favourites, and if you've ever seen that lovely little show on BBC, Scotland's Best Homes, they get the owners of the houses to leave a heart somewhere for the presenters to find, which represents what they feel is the heart of their home. Well, right here is ours. This little wooden stool that looks out onto the kitchen that me or Mum will perch on as the other one cooks dinner, chatting away about our day in our little pocket of vintage paradise.